Marc put the hard-on back into rock and roll. He made it shiny, he made it effervescent, he made it fun.
He was definitely born to boogie, yes, he was always a star.
Into it, as he was later on, it's the learning process. But he always had the capability of French kissing the angels and being French kissed back.
Tyrannosaurus Rex, when they first came out, were basically a duo. They were Marc Bolan and Steve Took, and Tyrannosaurus Rex was a folk duo, if you like.
Well, Tyrannosaurus Rex had a great cult following. They really did very, very well on the university circuit and at festivals.
As a DJ on the radio in Ireland, as a young chap, I would play Tyrannosaurus Rex records in all their transcendental jingle, jangle, hippy-dippy, bleating voice glory.
Tyrannosaurus Rex had done 3 albums, which, you know, had not really done much, to be quite honest, as far as sales were concerned, but showed us the creative output of Mr. Bolan's mind.
They were very, very a psychedelic hippie sort of love power band. He had lots of those hippie sort of principles. It was all love and things like that. Not as if he did change his principles, but he perceived, and everyone perceived, that things had changed drastically in the market, and bands like Zeppelin were coming along, and bands like Free were taking over, and rock was beginning to move.
So the early albums had captured this Tyrannosaurus Rex phenomenon, but economically it wasn't going anywhere really, and Marc realised that if he was going to be a big rock star like, say, Roger Daltrey of The Who or somebody he might admire, you know, he realised that he'd have to do something bigger and stronger.
Steve wanted to keep it a hippie thing, and Marc wanted to progress and to become a star.
You will find that Steve Peregrine Took was not with Marc Bolan after that period. And in fact, that's where Mr. Mickey Finn comes in.
Mickey Finn was in order to be handsome, charming, lovely man who played the bongos all right.
Mickey, in the Tyrannosaurus Rex, when he first came in, was imitating something which Steve Took invented. And that, of course, was because at the time, that's what Marc wanted.
Having Mickey Finn there also meant that he wasn't complaining about the electric guitar, because he was just happy to be there. And you know, Marc wanted to make the decisions, that was fine by him, so he was along for the ride.
And suddenly we've got a 4th album looming. They go into the studio, and when the engineers and producer come into the studio, they're greeted by not the usual but electric guitars.
It was a matter of getting off being cross-legged on the stage, plugging in the guitar, shaking it up, and wham bam, thank you ma'am, you know.
That initial transformation from Tyrannosaurus Rex to T-Rex, it did upset quite a few fans. The actual decision to change the name to T-Rex is to do with Tony Visconti, who was producing them at the time. He'd actually discovered Tyrannosaurus Rex. He was on a mission to find the next Beatles.
First thing had to be done was shorten the name. If you have a really long name, it's going to be little on a poster or any graphic, you know. If you have a short name, you can make it bigger, i.e. more visible, you know. Tyrannosaurus Rex was a great name, very evocative name, but it wasn't the sort of thing that would trip off a housewife's tongue.
People were finding it difficult to pronounce Tyrannosaurus Rex. I think Tony Blackburn or some DJ couldn't even say the word properly. So, you know, Marc didn't initially go with it, but then eventually he did.
Tony Visconti was a very, very able producer, and he came from a different environment. He came from New York. He'd been producing Bowie for a long time. His principle was to make records that were radio friendly.
Marc Bolan sort of reinvented himself as T.Rex and went into the more rockier side and stuff, you know, that he came up with the more contemporary sort of music.
It's like a worship for me to write, because I don't do it. You know, it's like I'm being used by a melody as a being, if you want, and there are certain chords that just, there are magic mists within those chords. You play a sort of C major chord, and I hear like 25 melodies and symphonies up here. I just got to pull one out.
As T.Rex, Marc really wanted something that was bigger. He wanted to be a rock and roll star. And what had happened was he was getting a bit moody about these things, and his wife at the time, his first wife, June Child, just got fed up, and she said, right, go on, go into the bedroom, and I'm going to lock you in there, and tomorrow morning when I come out, I want you to have written at least, you know, a few songs, and we're going to stick it on this album because I'm just fed up with this. And so Marc went in there, locked himself away, and the following morning the story goes that June came in with this cup of coffee and said, okay, what have you done? And he produced this track, Ride a White Swan, and he said, yeah, I'm happy with this.
Ride a White Swan was the first complete change from the old Tyrannosaurus Rex to T.Rex. They actually became from a totally album-orientated band to a band that was driven by hits.
It charted at number 25. And then it was kind of around. You'd hear it occasionally. Radio had started to pick up on it.
It took time for people to realise that they liked it.
And suddenly it was not reissued or re-promoted, I think is the word we're looking for, re-promoted, and bang, it goes up to number 2.
DJ started to play it, and the public went bananas. The teenage population discovered Marc Bolan, and overnight, virtually, he was elevated from being an icon of the hippie generation and the King's Road into becoming a nationwide pop idol.
First time that I noticed Marc was Ride a White Swan, Top of the Pops. And I was just totally amazed by the fact that he had so much charisma. And I remember actually sort of my mum sort of like disapproving and saying, you know, he's a freak.
This man had had an audience of the most aged, wisest, acid-taking, mad, wizard, freak, weirdos, underground people in this country for years, and overnight he's suddenly got this whole new audience of little teeny weeny beany pop pixie children.
And it was very different, you know. I think that's why he's such a legend nowadays, because you had all the blues stuff coming through in the late 60s and all that sort of free and bands like that, and then comes along this little guy with a guitar playing Ride a White Swan.
Very simple song, but just great. I think his vocal, because before Marc's vocal was always a bit slurred, and he had this particular addiction thing going on, and the trem on his voice, and it's still there in Ride a White Swan. You know, you have to listen close to actually hear about the lyric itself. But you know, fantastic delivery, and already his vocal was starting to mellow out a bit. His diction was becoming a bit clearer, much more commercial again, much more pop-oriented.
So suddenly the whimsical fairy tale had a backbeat, and suddenly the poetry had volume, and suddenly girls were looking at his trousers, and suddenly the audience looked like Marc Bolan.
Changing the style of the music slightly allowed it to reach a mass audience, really.
Was it planned? Premedité?
No, not at all. It just sort of came into it, you know. It moved into the realm of sort of commercial music on its own, really. I think it's probably the only way that it can happen.
Once Ride a White Swan had been out, they brought out their first album as T.Rex.
T-Rex's first album as T-Rex was a self-titled album. It was actually their last album as a duo. At that stage, Marc Bolan and Mickey Finn had this kind of, it was on an even partnership, I suppose. Marc hadn't quite taken the centre stage just yet.
It was also possibly not the first T-Rex album, but the last Tyrannosaurus Rex album.
Marc was still toying around with these sort of slightly mystical lyrics that he was very interested with, kind of elves and witches and things like that.
Oh, I thought it was great. I mean, tracks like Jewel, you know, they really rock out. They're kind of light in a way, but the guitaring's lovely.
The T-Rex album is still very much a bridging album with a lot of the Tyrannosaurus Rex sounds, and the T-Rex sound hasn't really been totally formed.
Great album, you know, and it married the old and the new together. Again, you know, the Wizard, when it's rock, a lot of stuff left over that he thought was sort of faves and blended them in together with his new sound and his new look.
She's my woman of gold, she's not very old. She's my woman of gold, she's not very old. I don't mean to be bold, but to me I hold your hand.
What made Hot Love a hit was because it's a cool record, you know, it just vibes along. You play it right now, you know, you're actually going to play in a minute, or is it playing already? I don't know. And it's very upful. It's lifting, you know.
This is when you got to take on board, they've gone from a two-piece to a four-piece with, I believe, a Mr. Curry, who was brought in on bass, and on drums, a guy called Bill Fifield, I believe, but who became Bill Legend, because that was the band that he was plucked from to join T-Rex.
I started out, you know, just with two people, and slowly I augmented it when I felt I could cope with it, you know, but I enjoyed working with perhaps the string section, so there's a lot of people. I wouldn't want to have that responsibility of having to work with them all the time. You know?
But this is your basic T-Rex group of 4 players.
Sure, yeah, and it's a question of economics as well, believe it or not. I mean, yeah. To go on the road is incredibly expensive. You know, we have to find £1,000 a week before you even play. You know?
She ain't not a witch, and I love the way she treats you.
That's the first single, the first song that you can actually hear the sound, which really sort of summarises T-Rex. You've got this slightly folky element, you've got some of the electric guitars in there, and you have these really bizarre backing vocals. It was very unusual even at the time. And I mean, in a way, they're almost slightly childish sounding, perhaps, the backing vocals, but that was what made that sound.
I think one of the nice things about Hot Love was that it sounded like everybody was having fun. It brought back fun and you know, and entertainment. And Marc brought back with his, you know, with the clothes that he was starting to wear, he brought back entertainment into music.
I think it was a simple track with a lot of air in it, and not too cluttered. And I think that was the magic of it.
When they put out Hot Love, this was it. This was the real deal. They actually, you could see a pattern forming. You could see that they became like the Stones and the Who and the Beatles and the Kinks in the early days. They started to put together a string of hits that you can look back on and think, bloody hell.
Get It On, I suppose, is one most people remember. And I think it's probably been used a lot in TV advertising. It's sort of, I don't know, there's something about the theme that sticks in your mind and it encapsulates the 70s, really. It's sort of optimistic and groovy and hedonistic and having fun.
Marc's guitar riff and the drum figure that brings it. I mean, that just kicks it off right there.
Get it on, bang on, get it on, and down, ow, ow, ow. You know, those snaps fantastic.
It was the one that went straight to #1. It didn't just hang around the charts a bit. That was it. T-Rex was in full flow. And Get It On was much like Hot Love in the kind of the style of music. It was slightly electric guitars, and it was, he dropped some of that sort of mystical element as well. It was quite a sort of a sexy song.
Get It On it was a more sort of a gutsier single than Hot Love.
You do sweet, glad and black, don't look back, and I love you. You're dirty and sweet, oh yeah. You're slim and
It has some very special people playing on it. Firstly, you've got Rick Wakeman, who was at his majestic, glittery, huge glittery cloak, playing piano on it.
You don't notice the keys so much playing, production probably why, but you don't notice the keys playing Wakeman, but he does this whole run down the keys, which you hear. So that's his sort of contribution, I suppose, really, is that run down the keys.
You have got Ian MacDonald, who not only played saxophone for Foreigner, but played saxophone for King Crimson, and was a King Crimson member, to be quite honest. Yes, he's playing saxophone on it.
The saxophone, Ian MacDonald's playing probably could have been used more, would have been nice, but it works, and that sound, again, was copied on 70s glam rock acts.
It was really the only song that actually had a decent chart position in America, and this was the bane of Marc Bolan's career, really, or his life, was he wanted to get his stuff heard in America. He wanted to get out to this American audience.
Get It On was probably one of their best records. I mean, they also had some credibility. You know, they had the guy from King Crimson playing on it. They've also done the Top of the Pops with Elton John's been on it. It's like everyone liked T-Rex. Everyone thought they were a credible band.
People who hadn't sort of discovered T-Rex with Ride White Swan, they'd either discovered them by Hot Love, or if not, certainly by Get It On. And so obviously Electric Warrior was just the album that went with that, and really, I think, brought in a lot more fans.
Marc Bolan was here and the world was getting to know about him, and that album certainly was his ship or his plane that carried him extremely well.
You couldn't help but love the album.
Marc Bolan had stuck to this sort of real 3-minute pop song formula, but it's just got that slightly glammy, rocky kind of feel to it. There were some great tracks on it.
Mambo Sun, Cosmic Dancer, Jeepster, Monolith, Lean Woman Blues, Get It On, Planet Queen, Girl, The Motivator, Life's a Gas, and Rip Off, which some people say is the first rock rap track.
The cover I liked a lot as well. It was very simple and spare, and the black and gold cover with Marc with his little Marshall amp and guitar.
Electric Warrior is one of those points where T-Rex came into their own, and you know, he realised on that album as well. I think he was realising himself. I think this set a benchmark for him, and made him go, right, now I've got my direction, I know where I'm going with this.
A lot of the lyrics, I think, were starting to become a lot more sort of sexual, although in a very subliminal way, you know, which of course obviously as teenagers are sort of reaching puberty and starting to pick up sort of things like that. You know, Bleached on the beach, I want to tickle your peach, it's a rip-off.
They hit a peak, they actually were in the groove, they got all the songs right. Tony was producing brilliantly with them.
All of these songs would have been done as acoustic demos and presented in that form. And then this guy's had the vision to see Get It On, Mambo Sun, Jeepster, all taken on, you know, that big, huge, pop, beautiful level of perfection.
You know, there were tracks like that, Life's a Gas and Monolith, that were just slightly slower, a little bit more folky, but by that stage, a lot of the hippies that had been into the band originally when they used to sit cross-legged on the floor, they really thought that that album was a sellout. But at the end of the day, Marc Bolan didn't want to just have this cult status. He wanted to be a big star. He wanted to be #1. He wanted to have hordes of screaming fans after him.
Life's a Gas. I mean, I was a T.Rex fan, but I found that one a bit hard to swallow, just because it was so perfectly sweet and sugar candy production. But I didn't want sweet and sugar candy. I wanted my lean woman blues, which again, listen to Dylan, early Dylan with the electric guitar. It's almost could have come from any of those early Dylan albums.
I used to go to Marc's house in Marble Arch, and across his lounge, he had albums stacked from one end to the other, and looking at them, there were just too many to kind of pull out. But he was certainly into Bob Dylan. I think Bob Dylan would have been one of his main influences.
I was always surprised that the Americans didn't take to it more. In the United States, they liked it, but it was still a little bit of an underground thing. They could have left Europe for 6 months, done America, come back for a couple of months, then gone back to America, and no one would have noticed the difference. Because they were in every magazine, they were doing every television interview, they were doing everything you could ever want to do. Everyone was talking about T.Rex. T.Rex became part of the pop rock establishment. They were there and they were thought of as brilliant.
Electric Warrior is that album that made everybody sit up and take notice, and everybody said, okay, T.Rex, they're here to stay.
Well, I was very flattered because all the Beatles in their own way said that we were like their successors. I'm not sure that it's true, but I'm very, very flattered. It's nice, it's an encouraging thing, you know.
Marc Bolan's record label with T.Rex was Fly Records, and the Electric Warrior album was the final album that was released on Fly Records. It was a sort of contractual obligation.
And got to #2, which was not bad.
#2 in the charts.
Going back, I mean, when that came out, of course, it has got the line at the end, I'm gonna suck you. Which, again, as a sort of teenager, you know, sort of teenage girls have incredibly smutty minds.
Probably, I think it was a closing of a period for T.Rex.
Certainly, there's been a change in England in 2 years, and we are part of the change. I mean, guys now can wear makeup, they can shout and scream, and they can and say that I mean, I can now go on television on a news program. I don't know even what this is for, but in England I can go on a news program, right? And say my mind.
Telegram Sam, January 1972, #1, first release on Marc's label, distributed by EMI Records, and I think the third #1 T.Rex pop chart wonderment in 11 months. It's not bad going.
Telegram Sam, Telegram Sam, you.
At the time, we music critics tended to look down our nose a bit at Marc at this point for repeating himself. You know, if you hear a succession of the hits one after the other over a short you know, over a few months, you start to think, well, he's losing the plot here. But in retrospect, actually, they're all great, you know. Telegram Sam still sounds great. You hear it again 20 years later, and you think, well, that's good fun, that's a great record, it still stands out.
They managed to actually create a bigger sound, if you like. Electric Warrior had had a lot of orchestral parts that Tony Visconti had put onto it, but with Telegram Sam, from the royalties that they'd actually had from the previous #1s, they were able to put a lot more money into buying new equipment, more state-of-the-art stuff. So they were able to get a much more professional sound. And in a way, that was, Marc Bolan was happy with that. He wanted the band to sound that little bit more polished.
I always think that Telegram Sam, to me, probably my favourite T-Rex single. Just a great record. It's got attitude, it's got humour, it's got everything that Bowie and the Beatles used to do really well. It's taking a little bit of the Mickey out of the whole business.
What does it mean? What did he, in the song that he called you, what does that mean?
I don't know, idea.
No?
I know nothing. It's Purple Brad Beep, you know, it's whatever you want.
One thing I didn't understand at the time was the fact that, of course, Telegram Sam was a song written about Marc's manager, Tony Secunda, hence the initials TS, Telegram Sam, and TS, Tony Secunda, who became Marc's manager late in '71.
Telegram Sam was taken off the Slider album, and this saw Marc Bolan moving slightly more into the centre stage. By this time, Mickey Finn's contribution was slightly a little bit lower down, and Marc Bolan was very much, you know, I'm on the covers, look at me.
To be able to constantly write hit songs when you're under pressure and you're trying to tour and do stuff in between time, and all the other people around you. I mean, the more success you get, the more people seem to be added to the entourage, and to stay focused like Marc did at that time was absolute genius.
Bang, 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 it's all coming out there now. You know, you can really feel T-Rex is a particular thing, and I think, you know, all these things are pointing to a high point where he's really coming into his own. He's defined in sound, he's defined what T-Rex is, and he's just, it's writing, it's all coming through.
Metal Guru, yes, that was another one of the string of hits that Marc had that after a while began to, you began to think, well, what is a metal guru, you know? You sort of started to lose a bit of patience with him. I mean, if you weren't fond of Marc and you weren't into the music, I can imagine people saying, what is this stuff, you know? Metal guru, what does it all mean? The answer was, it didn't really mean an awful lot, but it sounded good.
Metal Guru was reviewed somewhere as Mental Guru, and Marc thought that was a fantastic title for it.
I liked it on reflection more now than I did at the time. At the time, I sort of took me more of a time to understand it. I think it was again slightly heavier. He started to sort of want to rock it a bit more, and I always thought Metal Guru was the beginning of him trying to get more of a group feel on it, because if you listen to it, the Telegram Sams and all those Jeepsters things, they were very pop, straight pop, and I just think that with Metal Guru, he started to get more rocky.
The whole beginning to the track with the vocal, all that was just copied by a plethora of 70s bands, you know. His sound was really there, the 70s, sound of the 70s.
Metal Guru was another #1 hit for T-Rex, and it was one really at that stage the whole sort of T-Rex phenomenon was there, it was established, and Marc Bolan was really reveling with his feather boa and the glitter and everything, and he was still trying to crack that American market, and it just wasn't happening. They just weren't grasping this song, and Metal Guru was it was this real sort of happy, cheery, sing-along kind of song, and they just weren't understanding it. But the British fans, they thought it was great.
We play for the kids that never saw the Beatles, never saw Jimi Hendrix. They're seeing us as those sort of people, you know, because they never saw it, they weren't around it. The average age of the audience is 15, 16, you know.
I definitely remember the whole sort of feeling at school with my school friends was that we were all still T-Rex fans, and so, you know, Metal Guru I thought was a great song and was definitely sort of one of the T-Rex at their very best songs.
The Slider album is a great album. It really is a great album. You know, Spaceball Ricochet, great track. You know, Metal Guru. You know, again, it's like it's a definitive T-Rex album. It's all there to be had.
Spaceball Ricochet is definitely one of my favourites on the album. But it's difficult to choose because I think with the Slider, I like all the tracks.
I bought a car, it was overcast. I gave it my mind and it disappeared. I said, what can I do? We're all a zoo, all I do is fade. The space go shade.
When you get an idea, you need to bang out 3 albums that I always think that are pretty much the same for the public, so the public get it. This was just another one in that stage. Not their best album, but still very good tracks on it. I mean, it's hard to criticise someone when they're that good.
The album that had Bolan alone on the cover, looking like an hermaphrodite Lillian Gish, crossed with Shirley Temple in his Born to Boogie top hat. God bless him, what an album.
That didn't reach #1, but I think that was partly due to the fact that, of course, there were the Fly was cashing in. Now it had no longer got Marc. You know, that they were trying to get as much money out of the success of T-Rex as they possibly could, and on our pocket money, that meant that we were limited to how many, you know, sort of like particularly albums we could afford to buy.
So if you've got something and one other company's actively promoting an album, i.e. Slider, the other company that's got old stuff and things like that, just throw it out on the back of it, picking up the sales, picking up the promotion, and all it does is damage both sales.
It's a great album. He should have been completely happy with it. I think he was in a creative way, but you know, as a commercial success, he saw it as just falling slightly short.
Although at the time it was slated a little bit in the music press, I'd definitely say it's as good as Electric Warrior. Now looking back, of course, I mean there are songs and lyrics like the, you know, sort of like When I'm Sad I Slide, Watch Me Now I'm Gonna Slide, which I think shows that that the pressure of being famous was definitely getting to Marc. And I remember June sort of saying that they would, by that time they were getting to be prisoners in their own home because of the fact that you know, so many fans had found out where they lived.
And when I'm sad, I slide.
It seemed to sort of mark that meltdown point when a star just suddenly moves from being the buzzword, everybody's sort of rooting for you, and then suddenly you tip over the edge and you're on the way down. And I think Marc was starting to slide a little bit at that point. So many factors combined, really. Health, emotional problems. You know, the novelty was beginning to wear off, probably for him as well, you know. He needed a rest and needed a break.
It's been a hard year for us, but in a couple of years maybe I'll have a holiday.
How long do vous comptez faire ce métier? Longtemps?
doing rock and roll, I'll probably do it for about 4 or 5 years more, and I'm going to start directing films shortly. So that should be interesting. Going into a whole other thing.
It is good for your mind. You can twist and shout. They all hang out, but you won't fool the children of the revolution. No, you won't fool the children of the revolution. No, no, no.
Marc wrote that song for Joe Cocker, actually. And if you listen to the version of Children in the Revolution in the movie Born to Boogie, Elton John plays the piano in something of an approximation of a Leon Russell type style. And the sonic of the song in the film is nearer to how it was written.
The children of the revolution. No, you won't fool the children of the revolution. No, you won't fool the children of the revolution.
A lot of people had said the single version wasn't as good as the version that was on the film. It was a little bit more kind of rocky. Again, Bolan was leaning towards those psychedelic early years, and it was just a very psychedelic song.
Children of the Revolution, September 72, #2. And let's hope that Marc accepted it as a #2, because often, well, always, if a song went to #2, it didn't exist in his world.
I was absolutely gutted that Children of the Revolution didn't get to #1. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I just thought Marc was going to get to #1 forever.
Children of the Revolution, again, was one of those songs that was held off the top spot by someone like Benny Hill or something. It would have been #1, I think.
Children Revolution, to me, is like the beginning of his third stage. I actually thought it was one of the greatest records he's ever made. I actually thought the sound changed. It had really started to change. For me, the production, being a producer, I started to hear the sound change. It was like, sort of orchestrated in sort of a rock way. It just was bigger.
In the falling rain, I drive a Rolls Royce, 'cause it's good for my voice, but you...
T.Rex were on a roll, and Marc was on a roll. And the roll became a Rolls. I've got a Rolls Royce because it's good for my voice.
Marc was a leader, he was an icon, so people responded to just the very title.
That became my protest song. Whenever I was sort of angry and with anything, then I'd go up and put Children of the Revolution on full blast.
Children of the Revolution was actually originally used on a film that Marc Bolan made with Ringo Starr. And again, this was another attempt of his to try and break this American market, because the Beatles had been a big band in America. And so he got together with Ringo and said, right, well, let's put together like a little film. And the film was called Born to Boogie.
I have a film company with Ringo, and I will be making film. I think anything where the media is kind of an expansion of rock and roll. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about revolutions. The only revolution that's going to happen is if people like myself or Mick Jagger or Rod Stewart or whoever try to get into other fields, be it television, be it movies. Then we will get a revolution.
It's what people tend to fall into when they want to move their creative sources to another medium, when I think they should think very carefully about doing that. Everyone's made that, there's very few quadrophenias out there.
At the time, everybody was quite excited about it and was hoping it would be a real documentary about the band and about Marc Bolan, who was still a phenomenon that people were discovering. And we're anxious to know more about, but it really didn't tell you a lot about Marc, the actual film. The great thing now, of course, it is a record of him performing live.
Very enjoyable document of something that went on, of all these girls going completely bonkers.
I went to see it. I went to see it with my best mate, Dick Norman, on acid. And it was during the afternoon, and it was full of screaming, banshee-like little wailing teeny bob girls. And it was better than being at the gig, except it kept stopping and going into these studio bits, or what were, to me and Dick, hysterically funny comedic bits.
The fans just thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. But there were people who had their reservations about it, who thought it was a bit of a waste of time, who thought it was, again, Marc Bolan just sort of massaging his ego, trying to make himself out as the centre of attention.
More people would have gone to see it had it been released sort of, you know, those sort of 6 months earlier. But I think by the time it sort of got round to sort of all the provincial cinemas, at the beginning of '73, Marc sort of hit total, you know, dominance of the singles charts was starting to wane.
But I can't get no satisfaction. All I want is easy action. Stern as a lamb with the thoughts of a tiger. Moves like a cat and knows how to ride.
Solid Gold Easy Action to me started to get a bit confusing to me. It started to become a little bit cliched. It's sort of like, you know, I sort of think he was sort of struggling a bit. I mean, it was still great.
It wasn't Solid Gold Easy Action. It was a good rock and roll record, a good kind of record of that genre, but it was not Telegram Sam, or it wasn't Hot Lover, it wasn't like a White Swan.
Very simple. I mean, just a very, very easy song to dance to. There was nothing to read in between the lines. It wasn't a song that you would the lyrics you would remember that much. They were just very, very catchy.
20th Century Boy, released March 1973, reached only number 3.
David started to take off. I think there was a bit of rivalry there, and David would always watch Marc Bolan's career, study it. He would always be going on about it, you know. Oh, Mac's just been to America and he's not cracked America yet, and we're going out next week. It was like that, like a football team, you know. He would always watch what he was doing and how he was getting on. And then I think he wanted to get bigger than Marc, you know, because we hadn't quite got to the same level at that time as Marc Bolan was at with T.Rex. And I think David wanted to, you know, get to the top of the division before he did.
Tank's album, I think what it did was it sold in the UK and Europe. It did pretty well, and I think it sold because of where he was at that particular point. But again, it failed more so in the States. You know, not even getting really inside the top 100 really, and you know, I mean, that's, again, I'm sure that had a massive effect on him.
Tanks had this rather dubious picture of Marc astride a tank with the barrel pointed outwards.
Mary Whitehouse, who was a campaigner of keeping TV clean, she was outraged because she said it was phallic, and she tried to get the album cover banned as being obscene. And I think that was good publicity for Marc.
Born to Boogie's on there, which is an interesting point because Born to Boogie was the name of the film that he did with Ringo Starr and stuff, and that song isn't on the film, in the film, so that was interesting for a start.
it had a fuller sound, and although it wasn't sort of quite as commercially successful, and Marc, you could see Marc had perhaps put on a little bit of weight, you know, it still had some sort of really good songs on it.
I just think with Tanks, it showed that he was a little bit, not how can anyone be bored, but boardish, and he's sort of into autopilot. T-Rex is now a machine, it's going on, and I don't think he's been out of, because the American thing has not sort of happened as well as it could have done. I think he's sort of struggling a bit with where does he go next.
He didn't have the height in America. I just don't think they knew what to do with him. I think they didn't know what to do with glam rock. You know, by the time they were dealing with glam rock, Kiss and Bowie broke at the same time, so it was okay for Bowie because Kiss had come through. So they're like, oh right, makeup, glam rock. Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, we can deal with that. But you know, it was too late for him.
I think is another feature track that had basically that gave Mickey Finn certainly something to do. It was Mickey and his conga playing.
It was starting to reflect a slight decline in Marc's popularity because it went to number 4, you know. And if I got a single at number 4, I'd be quite happy. That's quite successful.
Slippery slope for me. It's like, sounds a bit like we need another single.
There's a point where you think that you're impregnable, where you think it doesn't matter what I write, I'm writing great stuff. And all of a sudden the audience turn around and go, yeah, that wasn't that good. You go, what do you mean? Everything I write's great. You love everything I write.
At the time, everything that Marc brought out I thought was wonderful. But I definitely remember that sort of, you know, by the time the Groover came out, the amount of my friends who were still T-Rex fans was starting to diminish. I love the fact that it started, you know, T-R-E-X. Although, of course, obviously that was one of the things that he was accused of, you know, starting to become very egocentric. You know, the lyrics were starting to become very egocentric, and that's when the press was starting to sort of pick on him, and you know, he was losing the plot.
No, I'm not having it. This is where I end my relationship with T-Rex. It's all over. But you've got to remember, this is a band who've had 40 million bloody sales of records so far. 4 number 1s, 3 number 2, 2 number 3s, and 1 number 4. And you know what? It's sort of forwards and then backwards.
There were so many things that Marc Bolan and T-Rex made in the 70s, and their music, certainly the early stuff that came out on the Electric Warrior album, for me that just summarises the 70s. You listen to that, that's early 70s, that's glam, it's got that distinctive stamp on it.